Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. We discussed this the day Kabul fell to the Taliban. The implications will be serious for the region, especially for Kashmir. And it's happening already. Infiltration of terrorists to the valley has shot up, more than double since last year. The Indian army is on guard. The threat is evident. After the rise of the Taliban in Kabul, Pakistan-based terror groups are training their guns on Kashmir. They want to ride the momentum. They want to target India. Tonight we bring you some numbers and the confession of one of the terrorists recently captured in the valley by Indian forces. We are also looking at the threat on the eastern frontier. China, rattled by the coming together of Quad leaders, is flexing its muscle on the Indian border. It is also holding drills to show its military might. How should New Delhi read all of this? We'll discuss this. Also on the show tonight, will the US government shut down this week? What does that even mean? Cash crunch, no social security checks, no salaries for troops. We'll tell you why superpower America has run out of cash. And wannabe superpower China has run out of power. Blackouts have spread to more than 20 provinces. Businesses have taken a hit. What is the Xi Jinping government doing? Why has former President Nicolas Sarkozy been sentenced to 1 year in jail? We bring you the details of a landmark case in France. And Britney Spears wins a long legal battle against her father. He won't be her guardian anymore. But who was in the wrong here? We'll look at how stardom and money can vitiate the most sacrosanct of relationships. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The Taliban cracked down on a small group of women protesters in Kabul by firing shots in the air. The women were demanding the right to work and education. British police officer Wayne Couzens has been sentenced to life in prison without parole for the rape and murder of Sarah Everard after he abducted her in London, in a case which sparked widespread protests. According to a report by North Korea's state media, leader Kim Jong-un has said that the United States' offer of a dialogue is a trick to hide its hostility. Kim also spoke about relations with South Korea, accusing it of provoking the North. Britain is still struggling to overcome a deficit of truckers that has left fuel pumps dry. On Wednesday, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, in his first address since the crisis, assured that the situation was stabilizing. But the truckers say that the crisis will have a knock-on effect on prices of food and gifts in the run-up to Christmas. A top Rohingya leader, Mohib Ullah, was shot dead by unidentified gunmen in a refugee camp in Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar. No one has been arrested and no one has claimed responsibility so far. Warning that the global supply chain will collapse if governments do not take action, the International Chamber of Shipping and other industry groups have issued an urgent plea for governments to restore free movement for supply chain workers after enduring travel restrictions and COVID-19 testing requirements. Italian riot police and climate activists clashed in Milan during a demonstration as energy and climate ministers were gathering for a pre-COP26 meeting. The scuffles broke out near the venue where hundreds of young climate activists have been meeting to lay the groundwork for the crucial COP26. As the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii continues to erupt, the U.S. Geological Survey has issued a warning. Aircraft flying over the island have been asked to remain cautious. While the volcano has erupted several times in the past, its eruption in 2018 was particularly catastrophic. Italian heavyweights Juventus beat holders Chelsea 1-0 in the UEFA Champions League group stage in Turin last night. Federico Chiesa scored the only goal 10 seconds into the second half, while Chelsea struggled in attack for the second game in a row. Elsewhere, Manchester United came from behind to beat Spaniards Villarreal 2-1, with Cristiano Ronaldo netting a last-gap winner in the 95th minute. A major investigation into boxing at the 2016 Rio Olympic Games has identified 11 suspicious bouts, whose results are likely to have been manipulated. In the first of 3 reports, Professor Richard McLaren, who investigated Russia's state-sponsored doping scandal, has revealed that a system was in place through which the then leadership of governing body AIBA was able to control the outcome of fights through corrupt officials.
Tonight I want to start with a video. It's the confession of a terrorist, one that Pakistan would surely deny. His name is Ali Babar Patra. He's a member of the Lashkar-e-Toiba. The Indian Army captured him alive during an encounter in Jammu and Kashmir. Earlier this week, he was presented before the press. He confessed how he was recruited by the ISI and the Lashkar, and he described how he was brainwashed and trained to conduct terrorist attacks against India. Ali Babar Patra is just one of the many terrorists who have tried to infiltrate and attack India in recent weeks. The trend is quite clear. Pakistan is targeting Kashmir once again. The Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan has emboldened terrorist groups in Pakistan. They fought alongside the Taliban in Afghanistan, and 45 days after the fall of Kabul, they're turning their attention to Kashmir. They're sending terrorists to the region in record numbers. Jammu and Kashmir has recorded the highest influx of terrorists in 2 years. The threat was always there. Now we are seeing it in action. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you how the Taliban's rise to power in Afghanistan is directly threatening the security of Kashmir. Let me start with a new report. This is what it says. 50 terrorists have infiltrated into Kashmir since July this year. 50 in the last couple of months. Where did they come from? 2 areas mostly, Pakistan's Punjab province and the tribal areas bordering Afghanistan. These terrorists are active in northern Kashmir. Why is this development alarming for India? Because this is a drastic rise. Remember, cross-border infiltrations had dropped sharply after India's decision to abrogate the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. In 2019, 138 cases were recorded. In 2020, that number had dropped to 23. 138 to 23. Do you see the fall there? Now in 2021, we already have 50 recorded infiltrations in the valley since July. And the year is far from over. The numbers have doubled already. And in 3 districts, Baramulla, Bandipora and Kupwara, foreign terrorists outnumber local fighters. Many of them are members of the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba. These are 2 terrorist groups with a known anti-India agenda. They're also known to be friends of the Taliban. They fought with the Haqqani network during the recent offensive in Afghanistan. They're all cut from the same cloth. And they see the Taliban's victory as their own. They want to ride the momentum and target Kashmir after Kabul. India has been on guard. Officials from the Indian Army briefed the media this week about their operations. They've been neutralizing terrorists, they say, almost on a daily basis at the line of control.
That there has been a lot of movement in the launch pad across line of control. You would recall that their infiltration attempt has also been made on 18th when 3 terrorists were neutralized in the neighboring area. Now it shows the desperation of Pakistan when he sees that the peace and stability in Kashmir is something that is not to Pakistan's liking. So there is desperation to send in terrorists to create disturbance and some kind of a sensational strike. In last 7 days, 7 terrorists have been neutralized and 1 terrorist has been apprehended, and 5 of these neutralizations have taken place along the line of control.
7 terrorists killed in 7 days. Infiltration attempts have accelerated after the fall of Kabul. Pakistan is using an old playbook to target Kashmir. Allow me to take you back to 1989. The erstwhile Soviet Union was defeated in Afghanistan. It withdrew its forces. That's when Pakistan began sending battle-hardened terrorists into Kashmir. It used the chaos of Afghanistan to create a security nightmare in Kashmir. By August 1993, 400 Afghan insurgents were in the valley. From 1989 to the year 2000, there were more than 55,000 incidents of violence recorded in Jammu and Kashmir. More than 15,000 terrorists were killed. More than 3,000 of them were from Pakistan and Afghanistan. In the same period, India seized 40,000 firearms, 150,000 explosive devices, more than 6 million rounds of ammunition. I'm giving you all these figures to underscore how serious the situation can become in the Kashmir Valley. 2 decades on, history is repeating itself in Afghanistan. Pakistan has destabilized Afghanistan yet again, and now it is aiming for Kashmir. India's response at this juncture would be critical in determining which way things go. And Kashmir is not India's only worry. To the east, China is also making moves. They're militarizing the border and rolling out new ships, new warships. Are the Chinese planning something big? Or are they simply acting out? It could be the latter, acting out. You know what that means. Resorting to brash behavior to let out suppressed feelings and reduce stress. And China is stressed. This month has been tough for them. First, the US, Britain and Australia announced a new alliance against them called the AUKUS. Then the Quad leaders assembled in Washington, D.C. They sent out a clear message that the Quad is not some fad or sea foam, as China once called it. It's here to stay. So the world is joining hands against China. How does China respond? The playbook is pretty predictable. China has been flexing its military muscle. Let me tell you what they've been doing at India's eastern frontier. Chinese troops violating the line of actual control yet again. Reports say 100 of them crossed over into the Barahoti sector in Uttarakhand. This happened in the month of August. PLA soldiers entered 5 kilometers into the Indian territory. They stayed for nearly 3 hours, damaged a local bridge and fled before the Indian patrol arrived. This is basically China's plan, to militarize the line of actual control, the border. There's a lot of construction happening. The Chinese are building shelter for their troops. They're making new airstrips and helipads. They're carrying out night exercises. This is happening in 8 high-altitude forward areas, like Hot Springs, Changla, Wahab Churup and Manza. And not just new camps, there are new weapons too. China has deployed the S-400 anti-aircraft system at the Ningchi base in Tibet. How far is Ningchi from the LAC? Just 15 kilometers. But what is the S-400's range? 400 kilometers. This new deployment is a clear message to India. Rethink your role in the Quad. This kind of bullying may work in the South China Sea, but not against India. We know what happened in the Galwan Valley last year. The Chinese were totally unprepared. The terrain overwhelmed them. The Indian troops finished the job there. So all of this preparation, this border build-up, is just an attempt to bridge the gap. Meanwhile, China's second strategy is still work in progress. It's being built in the dockyards of Shanghai. the Type 003. It's been called China's largest and most advanced aircraft carrier. Let me give you a quick brief. The Type 003 is the same size as America's Ford-class vessels. We're talking around 315 meters long. It has an electromagnetic catapult for launching jets. Now, this is complicated technology. Right now, only the US and France use it. If China sticks to schedule, the Type 003 could be sailing by 2025. Will the ship change the dynamics in the South China Sea? Beijing certainly hopes so. You see, the Chinese fleet is big and noisy, good enough for regional bullying, but not for long-distance deployments. The Type 003 is supposed to change that. It is supposed to project Chinese power beyond the first island chains. What is the first island chain? This is the chain I'm talking about, a series of island groups in the South China Sea. Some key US allies fall near this chain, like the Philippines and Taiwan. Inside the island chain, China is the top dog. Outside it, well, not so much. The new aircraft carrier could change this. But like all things with China, there is one problem: no transparency. America's warships are proven. So are British and French ones. But China's warships are basically paper tigers. The state media quotes impressive specifications and features, but no one has seen them in action. And that's the problem with the PLA Navy. On paper, they're clear favorites. 350 warships against America's 293. But the quality difference is huge. And do not forget, America is not alone in the Pacific anymore. Combined together, the Quad is miles ahead of China, be it military or economy. Beijing can try to downplay this rivalry, but their fear is evident. Here's what the Chinese ambassador to India says: we should refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs or engaging in any alliance or quasi-alliance targeting the other. This is the same ambassador, by the way, who predicted the Quad's doom. He called it a small clique that will find no support. Well, he was wrong. Today, the Quad has a 5G plan, an infrastructure program, a supply chain project, and an annual leaders summit. This is not some small clique anymore. It's a powerful alliance. The biggest proof of this is China's own reaction. On Tuesday, they kicked off a massive air show, drones, jets, missiles, you name it, and China was showing it off. And this was not a marketing exercise for the PLA. This was a display of strength. How should the Quad see this? And for starters, it means they're pushing the right buttons because China is getting agitated. It doesn't want to be seen as overwhelmed by the Quad. On the flip side, though, this is a sign of an ominous race. Nuclear submarines for Australia, new carriers for China, classic signs of an arms race. The only difference is this: the alliance of democracies is pursuing deterrence. China is pursuing world domination. New Delhi, meanwhile, has received a letter from Kabul, the first official communication from the Taliban. The template and language is interesting. It's written in fluent English, we can tell you, following all conventions and formalities. The letterhead reads: the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The signature is of Al-Hajj Hamidullah Akhundzada, the Taliban civil aviation minister. Yes, they have one now. He has sent his greetings to the DGCA. That's India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA. The Taliban has asked India to resume flights from Delhi to Kabul. Now, as you might be aware, since the Taliban took Kabul, all commercial flights from India to Afghanistan have been suspended. For a while, flights carrying refugees were operational, but those too have been suspended now. So the Taliban wants to resume all those flights. Look at what their letter says. The intention of this letter is to keep smooth passenger movement between the two countries. Therefore, we request you to facilitate commercial flights. The civil aviation of Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan avails its highest assurance. Highest assurance, they say. Do assurances work anymore, though? Last month, the Taliban had assured the world of upholding women's rights. Look what they've done. They've curbed all rights, and they're firing shots to disperse protesting women. The Taliban's assurances must be taken with a sack of salt, which is what India seems to be doing. This letter was dispatched on the 7th of September. It's been more than 3 weeks. The Indian aviation regulator has not responded yet. Guess which countries are running flights to Kabul? Pakistan and China, of course. Pakistan is sending diplomats to Kabul, and China is sending aid. On Wednesday night, a Chinese plane carrying aid worth $31 million landed at the Kabul International Airport. The Chinese ambassador says more flights will arrive in the days ahead. And not just aid, China is helping the Taliban diplomatically too. It is speaking in one voice with them in issuing ultimatums to the US. On Wednesday afternoon, the Taliban issued a statement. They warned America against flying drones over the Afghan airspace. This was apparently in response to remarks made by the Pentagon. What did the Pentagon say? That they would conduct over-the-horizon operations in Afghanistan. Drone operations, in other words. The Taliban are not too thrilled with the idea. They say, and I'm quoting again, Afghanistan's sacred airspace is being invaded by US drones. We call on all countries to treat Afghanistan in light of international laws and commitments in order to prevent any negative consequences. The Taliban are talking about international law, and China has backed them. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said, and I quote again, the US should earnestly respect Afghanistan's sovereignty. Listen to this. This is the Chinese statement. Sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. More importantly, the US should stop habitually imposing wanton military intervention and forcing its own will on others. This is still the Chinese speaking. It should avoid repeating the tragedies of plunging people into misery and suffering. Let me repeat what they said. The Chinese government is telling the Americans territorial integrity, forcing its will on others, plunging people into misery. It's a bit rich coming from China, given how PLA jets regularly violate Taiwan's airspace, how Beijing's diktats have plunged Hong Kong into misery. The Chinese statement is ironical. It is also well-timed. Back in Washington, D.C., a hearing on America's withdrawal from Afghanistan has just concluded. Some big revelations have been made about U.S. drone strikes. General Kenneth McKenzie, who is the head of the U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, has made a shocking admission. He has admitted what we've been reporting. America's last drone strike in Afghanistan killed at least 10 Afghan civilians, quote-unquote, by mistake. Listen to this.
29 August, we undertook an MQ-9 strike against what we thought was an imminent threat to HKIA. That strike was a mistake, and I take full responsibility for that strike. I was under no pressure from any quarter to conduct the strike. It was based on our intelligence read of the situation on the ground. While in many cases we were right with our intelligence and forestalled ISIS-K attacks, in this case we were wrong, tragically wrong.
Well, that's not all. This four-star general made another big admission, one that is personally linked to the US president. Let me explain the context. In a recent TV interview, President Joe Biden went on record to say that his military advisors did not tell him to keep 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. This is what Biden said, and he stressed repeatedly that no such request was made to him. Turns out the president was lying. General Kenneth McKenzie has contradicted Joe Biden, and he's not alone in doing so. General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you could say the US Army chief, has also contradicted the president. And they've both said that they wanted to retain American soldiers in Afghanistan, and that is what they recommended to President Biden.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
Contained 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. Those are my personal views. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government.
Well, had Biden listened to his advisors, the Taliban would not have been in a position to make offers. They wouldn't be sending letters to India to resume flights. Afghanistan today is a product of America's mistakes. The statements of Generals Milley and McKenzie are the latest corroboration of this. And Joe Biden is an embattled president. His foreign policy has delivered more setbacks than wins, and now even his domestic agenda looks headed for failure. In less than 24 hours from now, the US government could go into a shutdown. That's because the US Congress refuses to approve the Biden administration's budget. And a shutdown will be catastrophic for the US. In about 2 weeks, the US government will be out of money. America will default on its loans for the first time in history. Our next report tells you about the crisis that awaits the US.
A stadium filled with sounds of boos. That's how spectators welcomed US President Joe Biden on Wednesday. He was attending a baseball game between lawmakers at a time when the future of his domestic agenda is at stake. Biden is staring at a potential financial disaster. The coffers of the Treasury Department are about to run dry. The Biden administration is unable to get a budget bill passed. If the impasse continues, the US government will shut down. All of this has happened before. Since 1981, America has witnessed a total of 14 government shutdowns. But this time, the crisis is much bigger. America's reputation is on the line. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has issued a dire warning. She says if the government doesn't get the funds it needs, America would default on its loans for the very first time in its history.
It is imperative that Congress address the debt limit. If not, our current estimate is that Treasury will likely exhaust its extraordinary measures by October 18th. At that point, we expect Treasury would be left with very limited resources that would be depleted quickly. America would default for the first time in history.
The implications would be catastrophic, not just for America's reputation, but for its citizens too. Nearly 50 million senior citizens won't get social security checks. The military won't get its salaries. Tax refunds would be delayed. In short, millions of Americans would be strapped of cash in the coming weeks. The Democrats did try to avert a crisis by passing a stopgap bill to avert a shutdown.
We are ready to move forward. We have an agreement on the CR, the continuing resolution to prevent the government shutdown, and we should be voting on that tomorrow morning.
But the Republicans are adamant they won't allow the U.S. president to borrow more money to keep the government running.
House Democrats have made it clear we're running the place to sit down and shut up. The bottom line on the debt ceiling today, Democrats alone have set fire to America's House and are now demanding Republicans put it out for them.
This is a make-or-break moment for President Biden. He wants $1 trillion to fund infrastructure projects across America, but the U.S. government cannot cut a check. It doesn't have that kind of cash. The solution is to borrow the money. But already the United States owes more than $28 trillion to its creditors. In a couple of weeks, the U.S. government would touch its limit of borrowing, known as the debt ceiling. Biden needs the U.S. Congress to lift the borrowing cap. But the Republicans are determined to block the president's budget. The Democrats have less than 24 hours, and Biden doesn't have the political capital to push his budget bill through. The debacle in Afghanistan has pushed his approval ratings to below 50%. An embarrassing government shutdown now looks inevitable. Bureau Report, World is One.
Over in China, Xi Jinping is struggling to keep the lights on. His hybrid economy is literally going dark. There is no power at factories, no electricity in homes. Even traffic lights and street lamps are being turned off. This energy crunch started in pockets. A handful of factories were shutting down in August. Now it's a national crisis. At least 21 provinces have been affected. That's more than half the country. Even ordinary Chinese citizens are feeling the pinch. No mobile networks, no elevators, no lights. China is halfway back to the Stone Age. How did this happen? How does a country just run out of power? Over-dependence on coal, that's how it happens. 56% of China's power comes from coal. But their stock is running out. China's biggest power companies hold 11.31 million tons of coal. It might sound like a lot, but factor in China's population and its factories. This stock could run out in 15 days. That's how dire the situation is. So why isn't the Chinese government intervening? Well, they did try, but things went from bad to worse. Coal prices were already shooting up. Producers were struggling to keep up. What did Beijing do? Impose new emission targets. They scaled down coal production further, so supply came down and prices went up. This energy crunch is not a gift from market forces. It's a bitter pill from Beijing. Listen to this Chinese factory owner describe his helplessness.
As far as I know, this is the first time Shenyang has had power curbs. I've definitely had some losses, and I'm renting a power generator, which is costing me $464 plus diesel costs. So that comes to a cost of about $1,083 to $1,547 a day. If you were using grid electricity, then it's just over $155 a day. This is the situation now. The power curbs lasted for 4 days. To be honest, we can afford it. But if it goes on longer, then the costs are too much and we won't survive.
That's a grim picture. Factories cannot keep using generators. The cost is way too high, and the higher the cost, the lesser the profits. Let me show you China's latest factory data. The Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, was 50.1 in August. It slipped to 49.6 in September. What does this even mean? China's factory output contracted this month. That's what it means. It is happening for the first time since February 2020. So all the talk about China's dragon-paced recovery can stop. Top banks are revising their projections for China. Goldman Sachs is the latest. Their first growth forecast for China was 8.2%. The new one is 7.8%. They say around 44% of China's industrial activity has been affected, and this will trigger a chain reaction. Chinese factories supply top multinational companies, companies like Apple and Tesla. What happens if their supply is shut down? Well, two things happen: shortages and price rise. And I'm not just talking about the Chinese market, I'm talking about everywhere in the world. That's the cost of depending on Chinese supply chains. But let's forget about the macroeconomics. Let's forget about supply chains and emissions. Let's focus on the Chinese people for a moment. Their homes have no electricity, their shops have no generators, and none of this is their fault. They are being sacrificed for Xi Jinping's PR exercise. He wants clear skies at the Winter Olympics next year. He wants to show off at the Glasgow Climate Summit in November. So he leaves half the country in darkness. And the sad part is this: many Chinese still believe that the party will help them, when in fact the party is the problem. This energy crisis was years in the making. For decades, China kept chugging coal. They did not plan for climate change, nor did they invest in green energy. And now Beijing is giving its people a shock treatment, like slapping a band-aid on a bullet wound. Things could get worse in the coming months. Winter is the worst time to ration power, you see. Chinese families may not have enough electricity to heat their homes. What happens then? Will the obedient Communist Party men remain loyal, or will they fight for the family's welfare? We'll have to wait and see. Xi Jinping has the luxury of ignoring his people's problems, you see. He's an autocrat. He doesn't have to contest an election. Not the case in democracies. Elections are a celebration of the people's will. Leaders campaign for months to win voters over. And sometimes they try too hard. Like former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, he served as president from 2007 to 2012, a single term of 5 years. His re-election bid was like a reality show. Big stadium gigs, massive rallies, trendy TV advertisements. Well, turns out all of that was illegal. France has a spending cap on elections, 22.5 million euros. Accountants warned Sarkozy that he was about to cross this limit. But he couldn't care less. Sarkozy's campaign ended up splurging 42.8 million euros, nearly twice the spending limit. How did no one notice this? Well, Sarkozy hired a PR firm during the 2012 election. They used fake invoices to hide the real cost. What does Sarkozy say? that he never looked at the expenses. He says he was too busy running the country. Well, the courts of France do not agree. They have convicted him, the former president, of illegal campaign financing. Nicolas Sarkozy has been given a 1-year sentence. His only saving grace is that he'll get no jail time. He can serve the sentence under house arrest with an ankle bracelet. But Sarkozy does not plan to. His team is set to file an appeal. Now, for the record, this is not Sarkozy's first tryst with the law. He got his first conviction in March this year. That was in a corruption case. Sarkozy was sentenced to 3 years in prison, 2 of which were suspended. That verdict was a historic one. Sarkozy became the first post-war French president to get a custodial sentence. He got some bad press, but his public profile rebounded quickly. Today, he is publishing a book. More than a book, in fact. He's giving TV interviews, attending chat shows. Sarkozy still remains a darling of the French right. Others were not so lucky, like former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. In the 1990s, he too was accused of illegal campaign donations. That killed his career. In the year 2000, his party abandoned him. They found a new leader, a certain Angela Merkel. Campaign finances are a sensitive issue in any democracy. There are endless examples of fraud, irregularity, confusion. Every country has different rules. In the United States, for instance, elections are extremely expensive. The 2020 elections total bill was $14 billion. $14 billion. Where does this money come from? Super PACs. It stands for Political Action Committees. PAC, P-A-C. Super PACs can spend unlimited funds on their candidate, and they do not have to disclose their donors. What about here in India? The 2019 election cost around $8.6 billion. There is no cap on donations. Corporates and individuals can donate as much as they want. But there are spending limits. They change from constituency to constituency. The highest cap is around $100,000. But the problem is the lack of oversight. The Election Commission is spread too thin, so candidates end up flouting their limits from time to time. The fact is, democracy and campaign fraud coexist everywhere in the world. The question is, how can it be limited? Some countries have tried out publicly funded elections. Every party gets money from a government pool, no outside donations. Brazil, in fact, has tried out the system. So have some American states like Colorado, Maine, North Carolina, and New Mexico. The advantage of the system is obvious. No outside interference, no scope for lobbying. The downside is this: a big expense for the exchequer. It's the taxpayers' money, after all. Things would be much easier if leaders like Nicolas Sarkozy followed the law. But unfortunately, democracy is not perfection. It is the pursuit of perfection. Which brings us to a question. How many women have served as heads of state in the Arab world? In democracies in the Arab world? The answer, unfortunately, is 0. Never has a woman served as the leader of any Arab country, but things changed on Thursday afternoon. Tunisia appointed its first woman prime minister, Najla Boudin Romdani. She is going to be the Arab world's first woman leader ever. This is a very powerful message, one that will resonate across West Asia. But who is this woman? What's her story? And why is her appointment being called controversial? Here's a report.
Meet Najla Boudin Romdani, a former engineer, a geology expert, a law professor, and now the Arab world's first woman leader. The 63-year-old has risen from political obscurity to become Tunisia's 10th prime minister, the first woman ever to hold the post. Who exactly is this woman, and what's her story? Romdani was born in 1958 in Tunisia's Kairouan province. She is an engineer by profession. She served as a professor at Tunisia's National School of Engineering, specializing in geosciences, and holds a PhD in earthquake engineering. In 2011, when Tunisia had just emerged from the Arab Spring, Romdani was appointed to the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. She was tasked with implementing World Bank programs in Tunisia. Reports say Ramdane never had any political aspirations or affiliations, which is why her appointment as Prime Minister is even more noteworthy. It's also controversial. That's because Ramdane has been installed, not elected. She has been named to the country's top post by Tunisia's President Kais Saied. In July this year, President Saied ousted the Tunisian government. He suspended the country's parliament and assumed power to rule by decree. He also gave himself the power to appoint the Prime Minister along with the cabinet. Ramdane's appointment is his latest attempt at consolidating that power. It is also aimed at silencing his critics by appointing a woman to the top post. Ramdane will be the face of the Tunisian government as the real power rests with the president. And yet, this is a powerful face and message. Tunisia becomes the first and only Arab country with a woman as Prime Minister. It's a country that has been the harbinger of change. It's the country where the Arab Spring began. The transition from dictatorship to democracy has been tumultuous and the opposite of perfect. But it's a transition nonetheless. Here's hoping that Ramdane's prime ministership is another step in that direction. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let me introduce you to our next story with a soundbite. Here it is.
Today is a great day. It's a great day for Britney Spears, and it's a great day for justice. And there's definitely something to celebrate. I'm so pleased and proud to say Jamie Spears is no longer a conservator.
What you heard is self-explanatory. The man is talking about Britney Spears, the pop star. Jamie Spears is her father, and Britney's attorney claims the father is no longer her guardian/conservator. Now, if you have read the headlines recently, you already know this. A court has removed Britney's father as her guardian. Quick question. Isn't a parent a child's guardian for life? If so, what kind of guardianship is this that can be suspended by a court? This story is not about a traditional parent-child relationship, the most sacrosanct relationship on earth, some would say. This story is about money and how money can corrupt even the most unconditional bond on earth. The story begins in 2008. Britney Spears was 26 and famous. She was a global phenomenon. Her songs, Oops, I Did It Again and Toxic, were chart busters. And Britney was crowned the princess of pop. But she was struggling with substance and alcohol abuse. Britney had mental breakdowns in public. She once smashed a paparazzo's car, shaved her head in public, lost custody of her children. When the children visited Britney, the singer refused to hand them over to their father. She was also frequenting rehabs and hospitals. By 2008, Britney Spears had become another 90s pop star burnt by fame. Her case had also checked all the criteria of the guardianship system. What is the guardianship system? It's a legal arrangement. Under the system, the court grants a person's custody to an organization or individual. This happens when the court thinks that the person is mentally unfit. Britney Spears was mentally unfit. So her father, Jamie Spears, swooped in to take care of her. Jamie Spears filed for Britney's guardianship. Now, the story is a rather interesting one. You must know the background. Britney Spears' mother, Lynn Bridges, happens to be Jamie's second wife. This couple married in 1976. She filed for divorce 4 years later. She also sought a restraining order against Jamie Spears. She accused him of alcoholism. The couple soon reconciled. Then they got a divorce. Then they reconciled again, just around the time the guardianship was granted. And then they separated again. There's been a lot of back and forth. Britney did not have a great relationship with her father. While Britney and her mother were thick as thieves, the father mostly remained absent or drunk. So when the parents divorced in 2002, Britney said it was the best thing to have happened to her family, the divorce of her parents. But in 2008, the father was back. Jamie's attorney claims the story is of a father who wanted more for his daughter than to live and be well. The story being sold is of a man who rose to the occasion and cared for his mentally ill daughter. Well, Britney Spears disagrees. She says her father bugged her bedroom, controlled her money, vetted the people she met, oversaw visits to her sons, also controlled her reproductive rights, did not let her have any more children, and forced her to perform on stage against her will. Britney Spears says that her father controlled her life end to end. Now, in 2019, he gave up most of these controls, but still called the shots on Britney's finances. FYI, Britney Spears is worth $60 million. Reports say the father quoted $2 million as the price for Britney's freedom. And if that's true, the story becomes one of extortion in the name of guardianship. It also becomes a stain on a parent-child relationship. Britney's equation with her father is hard for most of us to understand. A parent-child relationship is supposed to be the holiest bond on earth. For most of us, our parents are our safest place. They protect us from the world. They care for us at all times, be it mental illness or a physical ailment. We feel the safest when under the care of our parents. Now, this is the very logic behind the guardianship system. Many countries in the world have it. In England, for example, the system dates back to 1600, the year 1600. This was during the reign of Charles II. A lot has changed since. Children have been making millions at an early age. And the money has clearly corrupted the parent-child bond. Britney Spears is not the first celebrity, by the way, to have had a showdown with a parent over money. Hollywood has seen too many such cases. You might recognize this man, Macaulay Culkin, from the Home Alone series. Culkin sued his parents for $17 million when he was just 16 years old. The actor said his father was mismanaging his earnings. Singer LeAnn Rimes once sued her father for spending $7 million of her earning. The father countersued and said that his daughter spent her money frivolously on cars and boyfriends. Can parents advise their children on money? Of course they can. Some would say they should. Do parents have guardianship rights? Yes, they do. But do parents have the right to abuse this guardianship? No, they don't. So in theory, we know the answers to all of these questions. Unfortunately, in real life, things are more complicated. Britney Spears and her story is open-ended. Both sides have their versions. Both have their differences. Britney Spears is 39 years old. She has all the rights to be free, to live life on her own terms. That's that. But there's also no clear villain in this story. Could this legal trap have been avoided had Britney's behavior not been so erratic? Did her father abuse the blood ties to extort the celebrity daughter? Would all of this have happened had Britney not been famous and rich? Does love between a parent and a child dissolve when they hit a certain bank balance? Full disclosure, it's hard for me to make sense of this story, frankly. So I'll ask you to write to us. Let us know what you think. I'm going to wrap the show, leave you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.